Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this evening event. Dr. Carlson is a globally recognized innovator and thought leader on, good evening, on value creation. His company, Practice of Innovation, works together with other companies, with governments and universities in order to improve the innovative performance. Okay. Sie können wo immer Sie wollen. President Obama relied on your expertise in the National Advisory Council of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, as well as many other presidents and representatives of governments all around the world. From 1998 to 2014, Kurt was CEO of SRI, formerly known as the Stanford Research Institute. SRI became a global model for the creation of high value innovations and pioneered innovations such as the computer mouse. So without Kurt, we wouldn't have a computer mouse.
No, that's not true.
No, I know. The personal computer interface, just as we all use at work and of course at home. The high definition television standard in our living rooms. Good evening. Speech recognition, not to forget, and the personal assistance on the iPhone, called Siri, better known as Siri, and intuitive surgical, which uses technology pioneered by SRI as well. So these are all innovations that we use every day, nearly every day, and nearly everybody of us. We usually don't give a second thought on it, since their existence has become a second nature to us. After Kurt joined SRI as a CEO, he tripled the company in size and created with partners tens of billions of dollars of new value. But how is it possible to create one successful innovation after the other? So we humbly ask Kurt for enlightenment and to tell us how we get very wealthy within, within 1 hour or 40 minutes. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
That's funny. Oops, how do I get rid of this?
You can use this. There's no mouse.
Oh.
Switch.
I'm going to get rid of that. There we go. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So the short answer is it's all magic. That's the short answer. It's actually not. It's a very systematic process. First, Franz, thank you for having me here. It's been a wonderful day with you and your staff and everyone else. And of course, the beautiful Vienna. There can't be a more gorgeous place in the world. And of course, this has, for many centuries, been one of the intellectual centers of the world. I played the violin professionally as my first career. So you can imagine, as I walk around Vienna, I get this buzz. It's like Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Wagner, Mahler. I mean, they're all here, right? And so this is a very special place, very special people, and very special culture. So thank you again for having me, and thank you, Richard, for having me at the Drucker Forum, which is an amazing conference. If you get a chance to go, you should. Speaking of Peter Drucker, he said, because the purpose of business is to create and keep a customer, the business enterprise has two and only two basic functions: marketing and innovation. How many people here have a customer? Raise your hand if you have a customer. Does anybody here not have a customer? We all.
You want to be a customer?
Oftentimes I am, but oftentimes I serve other customers. So tonight, you're my customers. I don't determine the value of this presentation. Only you do. So I'm going to try and do the best I can, but ultimately, you'll decide whether this talk has any value or not. And that's straight Peter Drucker, right? Our job is to create and keep our customers, and my goal tonight is to help you hopefully learn a few things. Well, I think we all have customers, actually. If you're in business, if you're in a non-for-profit, if you're in any kind of enterprise, you have a customer. How many of you consider yourselves to be innovators? A few people? Okay. If you have a customer, don't you have to be an innovator? Isn't your job to be continuously creating new value for your customers? I return to this quote. It's the only reason you're in business. It's the only reason your enterprise exists, to create value for your customers and hopefully enough value to keep them and to support your enterprise. Fran was kind enough to mention some of the things we did. Intuitive Surgical is now a $28 billion company, Nuance $4 billion. When Steve Jobs bought Siri, it added $50 billion of market value to Siri. We unfortunately didn't get all the value from these innovations, but we did okay, too. And my teams have won 2 Emmys. My team set the US standard for high-definition television with lots of other great people, of course. I wrote a book on innovation. I'm writing a new book that is all the things that I've learned since I wrote that book. And every year we spin out 2 or 3 new companies, and we aspire to create billion-dollar companies, which sounds maybe a little strange for an organization with only 2,500 employees. But for reasons I'm going to discuss, we don't think we have any choice in today's world. We do workshops. I've done workshops all over the world on innovation. So if some of the things I say tonight sound a little extreme, maybe it's based on doing literally hundreds of workshops with leading companies, government organizations, universities around the world. They're actual observations that we made over and over and over with very few exceptions. Siri is an interesting example, which I'll come back to, but we had to do the research. And we actually took us 3 years to spin that company out. We had the technology. Our problem was we had no business model, and we'll come back to that. We didn't know how to make money. So for 2 years, we did very little work, just trying different ideas. Finally, we came up with a plausible hypothesis. We hired those folks in the center. The fellow on the right-hand side is probably one of the top 5 AI people in the world. I think he might be even better than that. He assembled a team of the best people in the world. We went out and we got most of them. We formed the company, and 3 months later, Steve Jobs bought the company from us. What's interesting about that is we didn't want to sell the company, but he finally made an offer that the team wanted to take. What was also interesting about that is that Steve Jobs personally came over to buy the company. He didn't send the vice president. He showed up. He took our team to dinner in his house. He was calling our CEO multiple times during the day. How many CEOs would do that? How many CEOs would even know the value of a Siri when it happened before the rest of the world knew it was going to happen? Our experience is he was unique at the time. We called up other companies because we wanted to have a bidding war if we were going to sell the company. He was the only one constantly calling us who wanted to buy the company. And I'm going to talk to you tonight about the central role that value propositions play in the entire value creation process. And this one idea applies to everything you do in life. So if you take one idea away from this, this will be it. Because literally, everything you do in life, you have to answer these questions. And you'll see. I hope I can make that case. You know what the world is like today. Endless opportunities, exponential progress. That's Moore's law on the bottom for computers. intense competition, new business models. You see companies like Tesla. It's kind of a traditional approach. They start at the high end and sell fancy cars to super rich people in Hollywood. That's how they got started. But now they're trying to come from the bottom and produce more affordable cars to become a bigger, more successful company. And then you know about companies like Uber. Uber attacks companies from the side. In this case, the taxi industry. When you get attacked from the side, generally it's game over, because you can't change your business model enough to respond in time to be effective. And this is happening now in financial services, banking. There's a whole slew of companies that are being formed to try and take bites out of the financial industry, which is so bloated and regulatory and inefficient, but also in medical systems and medical devices. Just about every area, people are trying to figure out how do you Uberize that business. I'm not going to go through all these. These are just different technology areas. And the point I want to make here is that basically we've done nothing yet compared to what we want to do. This is the best time for innovation in the history of the world. Every area is wide open to major new innovations. Think about what happens when autonomous vehicles actually become practical. And I asked people, how many billion-dollar opportunities do you think are on this chart? Is it 1? Is it 10? Is it 100? It might be thousands. Because literally nothing that we dream about has happened yet. And somebody's going to capture these. The question is, how? How do you do that? Well, in Silicon Valley, and I'm sure here, there's a battle going on between big data, you may have heard that, the cloud and the internet, storing data up in the cloud. Computer assistants like Siri, that's now become a ubiquitous kind of technology. Everybody's working on those. And machine learning, you know, this next generation of computing where you can look at data and without algorithms you can actually, it'll tell you what's going on, how to think about it. And everybody wants to control this. They want to control your avatar. They want to create an application that is so friendly and so compelling for you that everything you do goes through that avatar. And whoever could do that, if they could pull this off, this could be the most valuable company the world has ever seen. Because all of a sudden, it would be on top of all these other applications that are underneath it. So there's literally, this is probably the biggest battle that's going on right now in Silicon Valley. Who can control this? Who can get the data? Who can develop the computer assistants? And who can have the machine learning technology to dominate this field? We'll see what happens. The other thing is, there are endless markets in today's world. Basically, most of the world still is living pretty much in poverty. Those are all opportunities for people. There's a picture of China. I just came back from China. They've made enormous progress. If you don't think Chinese are going to be tough going forward, I recommend you go to China and see. Just in the last 10 years, it's astounding the progress they made. And the way I describe this to people is China has more honor students than we have students in America. And they're willing to work 80 to 100 hours a week forever. Really smart, motivated people. But it's also an opportunity for new markets. Companies. Well, this is a dynamic world. How are companies doing? Well, this chart shows the lifetime of the top 500 companies in the United States. And these bumps up and down are the life cycles changing depending on the market. So when times are good, companies last longer. When times are bad, they go away faster. And it's amazing how periodic that is. So 100 years ago, if you were a big company, you might last for up to 100 years on the average before you went away. Today, it's down to about 12 years or so. And I just read a report where it's maybe just 10 years. So just when you become invincible, at that moment, if you don't respond to the marketplace, you can have a problem. Kodak went from #1 in the world to out of business in 10 years. Nokia went from #1 to out of business in 7 years. Apple did 2 generations of technology, and they wiped out Nokia. And by the way, Nokia had the technology, they had the people, they had the market information, they had everything except one thing, the ability to innovate the way Apple did and Steve Jobs. How about other organizations? I review programs of the Department of Defense in the United States, national labs, university tech transfer. Mostly they lose money, even no matter what they say, unless they have a big drug they license. Government R&D is generally very inefficient. Incubators have marginal success. I review programs there all the time. And even in Silicon Valley, where I live, most venture capitalists lose money every year. About 70% lose money. 5% make all the money. And there are a few in between that make some. And you might ask yourself, what's the difference between the ones who make all the money and the ones who lose? And I'm going to argue it's because the people at the top stick to a few fundamental principles that if you violate them in today's world, it's very hard to be successful. It comes down to a few fundamental principles. Here's a quote I like from Gary Hamel at Harvard. Every CEO at least give lip service to the idea that the world is moving faster and we need to do a better job in innovation. But if you go into an organization and ask people to describe their innovation system, you'll get blank looks. They have none. This is the test. You can do this yourself. Walk into any organization, go up to a middle-level manager, and ask them to describe their innovation system. Those are the people who should be implementing it. And if they can't describe it, there is none. Now, what's remarkable is, one of the things we study in the Drucker Forum is that people teach their staff leadership, project management, all the management concepts of Drucker, just a whole host of things. But for the most part, they don't teach value creation, the fundamental purpose of the enterprise. It's still not taught. So let me ask this group. In your companies, do you have an innovation playbook, or whatever you want to call it, with the fundamental principles that you teach to your staff? How many of you have such a system?
The micro-Baldrige system provides the process.
What does?
Micro-Baldrige, the quality management system.
Well, it's one kind, but quality is, I'm going to make, yes, thank you for that. I'm going to come to that. The difference between quality and value creation. It's a very important point. Yes, yes. Last year, I asked this question of the 500 people at the Drucker Forum. 5 people raised their hand. I met with 3 of them afterwards, and it turned out it wasn't true. I couldn't track down the other 2, so I don't know. So I'm going to try it again this year, again, Richard, so be ready for it. We'll see if we can do better this year. So, the first, in the last couple hundred years, the first real revolution was the assembly line. The focus was on cost, right? Get rid of cost. And then there was the total quality movement, which is what you referred to. And the focus, to Cacciano and Deming, the focus was now on cost and quality. Cost and quality are 2 attributes of value, but they're not the whole story. We need to now move to a 3rd generation where yes, everyone does TQM today, but we need to move from cost and quality to value. This is the next frontier for how we work together. So one of the things I've been working on is a value creation playbook, basically a basic kind of handbook of fundamental principles that you can give to your staff and you can teach them. It's a set of definitions of core value creation concepts, value creation tools, and processes that accelerate value creation. For the last 2 years, I've been working with the National Academy of Engineering, which is the most prestigious such organization in the United States. It's not part of the government, it's independent, so people tend to believe it because it's not political. And we've been studying innovation best practices around the world. Here in Europe, we've had people come from Europe, write papers about what's going on here, Asia, all over the United States. And we wrote a report that basically collates best practices. And from that, one of the recommendations is you should have a playbook. If you don't write down what you want, obviously it's not going to happen. So this kind of rumor mill is not going to do the job in a competitive world. The concepts apply to every role in the enterprise. They apply to everybody in this room, everyone, no matter what you do. And it's just one example. Best practice is when you start any new project, you bring people together and you do a workshop where you explain these fundamental best practices. And what we've discovered is if they're not in place, at best, the results will be episodic. So I mentioned some terrible results so far, and there are always exceptional people. If you have a Deming or a Beethoven, conventional rules are kind of beyond the point. But for most organizations, the ability to be systematically successful is really the goal. At SRI, we applied these principles. Franz didn't mention it, but when I went to SRI, the company had been failing for over 20 years. It was $1 away from bankrupt, had no money at all to hire people or do anything like that. And what we changed was how we work. And as Franz said, when I retired, we tripled the size of the place and created that many tens of billions of dollars of economic value. And now every couple of years, another billion-dollar company is coming out of SRI. There are very few organizations in the world of that size that have systematically created a process to create billion-dollar businesses. And it's just from the way we now work. It's the way we work. I like to say the way we work is our most important innovation. So we're working with government agencies around the world. I'm working with the National Science Foundation. We're implementing the ideas there. And that's particularly important because they teach students as well. And it's a way to spread these best practices throughout all over the United States. But also working with Singapore, the National Research Foundation. I'm on their advisory board like I was on President Obama's. And they've made enormous progress. And we just did a workshop with their team, again, working on how we can implement these in a very different kind of environment. So very prestigious, but very small. If we can get it to work there, and we can get it to work in the National Science Foundation, which is right now, I guess, the biggest research funding agency, then I think we'll demonstrate that we can make an impact. So let me give you a couple examples of this. Identify and remove points of failure. So that's why are we having such bad results? Well, having reviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of different proposals and ventures, I do this all the time. It's basically what I do is review things and work with people on creating value. And what we discovered is almost all failures start at the start. They just have no value. Finishing them wouldn't create any value for the enterprise or for society. And often, I would say as kind of a general rule, typically less than 20% of what we see has any value at all for stakeholders. So from this one general result, I conclude if we could get rid of half of the ones that have no value, we might be able to double the performance at the same amount of money we have today. Now, if you're an aficionado of Deming, you know he wasn't after a factor of 2. He was after factors of hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands. That's harder here, but I think we can do much better than a factor of 2 because the upside is almost unlimited. This is just getting rid of the waste. And the main thing they don't have is a value proposition. So the playbook has a number of different parts. How many of you have heard this expression, fail faster, succeed early? Some of you, it must not be a big deal here in Austria. Anyway, people say this in America all the time. I think this is a really terrible idea. Would all of you who want to fail fast raise your hand, please? I don't want to fail fast. That's kind of a crazy idea. But it's worse than that. It doesn't tell you what to do. What innovation is learning, searching, and creating fast to succeed early. Anything you can do to help your teams learn and search and create faster, good news. Any barriers you set up, access to information, anything you do that stops these things from happening is bad news. So just that one thought, I find is transformative. And the new book I'm writing is about the connection of education principles and innovation, because to me, that's what innovation science is all about.
Now questions, please. Okay.
So here's one. I asked groups, what's your definition for innovation? So I've asked this question of tens of thousands of executives. And here's the definition we use. Creation and delivery of new customer value in the marketplace with a sustainable business model. I was telling with Franz today, with our group, I've asked this question of literally, again, thousands of senior executives. Only 2 have ever mentioned the business model. Only 2. Imagine that. If you don't have a business model, you do not have an innovation. You're just playing around. And if you don't even have that in your definition to communicate that to your staff, don't you think that slows you down a little bit? Maybe it slows you down a lot. How many companies have I reviewed, new companies, that had no business model? They said, we'll figure it out later. That is a terrible idea. New innovations are also surprising. What did you think the first time you saw a ketchup bottle turned upside down? Did you go kind of, hey, what's going on here? And then you probably thought, that makes perfect sense. You know, in the past, I pounded on the end and spilled ketchup over all my friends, right? That's a terrible thing. It solves that problem. But now, when you see a ketchup bottle and it's not turned upside down, you're probably surprised and disappointed. Why didn't they turn it upside down? And this defines our job as innovators. We have to surprise our customers. If there's no surprise, it probably doesn't really matter. Then they adapt to it, and then we have to do it again. It never stops. Innovation is a continuous process that never stops. What's your definition for customer value? That's another really basic definition. I don't know if you've thought about it in your company. The most basic definition is benefits over costs. Financial people say benefits minus costs, but that's not how we as humans perceive value. We always perceive things as a ratio. 10% up, 27% down, that's how we evaluate. And benefits and costs are all subjective. Only the customer decides benefits and costs. So no matter what I do tonight, quantitatively, it doesn't matter. It's what you folks think, your perceptions of what we're talking about. That's true of all customers, all value propositions. So here's an example of also understanding the richness that can come from value. So value comes from commodities, products, services, experiences, and emotions. At the bottom are commodities like wheat, where the only thing that matters is cost. And then you have products, and you can work your way up. So Nokia, as an example, made tremendously robust phones. You could pound the thing on the floor, and it would still work. And it was low cost. It was a tremendously solid phone. But Steve Jobs created better products. And then he added services like iTunes. Then he added experiences like Siri. And then he branded the company as being special. You're special. If you buy those other products, you're not special. You're making the wrong decision. It's too bad. You could have been smart and clever and bought Apple products, but you made a mistake. Poor you. So a year and a half ago, Apple got 93% of the smartphone market. I'm told Nokia got 12%, and Japan lost all the money in between. Steve Jobs understood the value hierarchy. So they're getting close to being a $1 trillion company, and of course he put Nokia out of business. So here's our definition for a value proposition. It is the basic definition for everything you do. You want to address an important customer and market need with a new, compelling, and defensible approach, solution plus a business model that provides superior benefits per cost, which you now recognize as value to the customer when compared to the competition or the alternatives. It's not very clever, but we call it NABC. Sorry, I wish it spelled something, it doesn't. NABC, need, approach, benefits per cost, competition. What happens if you take one of these questions away? Would you know what the other person is saying to if you just take one of these away? What if they take away the need? You don't know what you're doing. If you don't have a solution with a business model, you have nothing to offer. If it doesn't have superior benefits per cost compared to the competition, why would anyone buy it? They won't. You can make a value proposition as complicated as you want, and there are a lot of methodologies out there that make it really, really complicated for you to answer all the different parts. But you can't make it more succinct than this. Once you get this, then you can start building and adding other parts to it to create a full business plan. But the problem is most people jump to the plan before they answer these questions. This is the main point of failure. And by the way, having done hundreds of these myself, I've never gotten one right the first time, the 10th time, the 30th time, or even some cases the 100th time. It's really hard just to answer these 4 questions. It takes an enormous amount of work, iteration, and great partners to answer these 4 questions. But once you answer them, you're on a pretty good path forward. I want to show you a little video for fun. Let's see if this...
For a number of years now, work has been proceeding in order to bring perfection to the crudely conceived idea of a transmission that would not only supply inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal graviers. Such an instrument is the turbo-encapulator. Now, basically, the only new principle involved is that instead of power being generated by the relative motion of conductors and fluxes, it is produced by the modial interaction of magneto-reluctance and capacitive directance. The original machine had a base plate of pre-famulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the 2 spurting bearings were in a direct line with a panametric fan. The latter consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic marsal veins, so fitted to the ambivation lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented. The main winding was of the normal lotus-o-delta type placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator, every 7th conductor being connected by a non-reversible Tremie pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the granite. The turbo-encapulator has now reached a high level of development, and it's being successfully used in the operation of Noper trunnions. Moreover, whenever a fluorescent score motion is required, it may also be employed in conjunction with a drawn reciprocation dingle arm to reduce sinusoidal repleneration. It's not cheap, but I'm sure the government will buy it.
Now, I hope you realize that was a joke. I have sat through more presentations that were indistinguishable from that than I can tell you. At national labs, incubators, government program reviews, they sound exactly the same way. So would anyone like to repeat that value proposition? If you could, it'd be really funny, actually. But unfortunately, that's what people mostly do. We call those big A's. They're all about the approach. The need was obvious. Don't even mention it, really, just kind of in passing, boop. I want you to spend, Kurt, I need 2 or 3 hours of your time to explain my brilliant idea. The benefits are obvious, and there's no competition. There's never any competition, but there's always competition. I make an analogy sometimes that a mother who produces a baby, when it first comes out, it's all covered with gooey stuff and parboiled and what have you, and you go up to the mother and say, hi, and she says, isn't this the most beautiful baby you've ever seen? And you go, well, yeah, clean it up, would you? I mean, really clean it. And she's looking at you and saying, no, seriously, isn't this the most beautiful baby you've ever seen? And you go, yeah, but your face can't quite do it. Who does she blame? Does she blame her baby or you? She blames you. There's something morally wrong with you because you don't realize this is the most beautiful baby the world has ever seen. And you know what? She's right. She's right. Now, unfortunately, in this case, they're wrong. They bring their baby to you, and if you don't tell them they're wonderful and love it, they think there's something wrong with you. But what's missing is there's no framework to have an intelligent discussion. What are you supposed to do with this? If you're a manager of any level in an organization and somebody describes something like this to you, it's hopeless. The only thing you can do at that point is you're going to frustrate your staff and they're going to blame you, as opposed to having a common understanding, creating value. Incredible percentage of presentations, they almost all start out this way. These are, people often say, we have a great toolbox of capabilities in our company. That's not a value proposition. People say we work hard. Yeah, that's true. Everybody works hard. That's not what we're after here. So here's a little experiment. This is the kind of thing we teach everybody. So you have customers, you have capabilities in your enterprise, and competition. Capabilities are things either you can do or you can find partners to do. Where do you want to be in this? 1, 3, 2, or 4? How many want to be in 1? Okay. How about 2? Anybody want to be in 2? How about 3? Anybody want to be in 3? Okay. And how about 4? How many want to be 4? Got a bunch of 4s. Well, so we always liked being in 4, where we had a competitive advantage. So if we were trying to do something, if we had to go head-to-head with Samsung or somebody, it was really hard. They have so much muscle and momentum. And we call that the white space. That's where there's an unmet need of significance, where we have some capabilities to potentially go after it. And then within that white space, there's a beachhead. There's a place where you can find customers who want your product so much they'll accept it even when it's too expensive and doesn't work perfectly. That's how you get started, your beachhead. And that's always a tiny fraction of the big part. And the idea is if you can get the little part, if you do the right things, you can expand then into the bigger market. The beachhead for Siri when we did it was business travelers like many in this room. It only did a very small number of things. And then over time, we wanted to expand it to do more things. Steve Jobs didn't care about that. He wanted to go after the whole market. And if you remember, it didn't work very well in the beginning. It's beginning to work pretty well. But we couldn't, as a new startup, we couldn't do that. We had to focus on business travelers who had the urgent need to find a restaurant or a train, just a small handful of things. One of the things we also teach our folks is to start by taking the risk out of their value proposition, and we call it bring it to life. Make it so people can remember it. And do that without spending really any money. And people think, well, you can't do that. I got to build it. My big A, I want to build my big A. And that is completely wrong. You want to be very cost efficient, particularly in the beginning, until you develop your value proposition and take the risk out. This is a demo of a buoy. You can see it's a buoy in the ocean. And these arms have a plastic material in them that when you squeeze it, it produces power. So this was for a Japanese customer. And the team came in to me and they said, we're going to produce a buoy, and it has plastic material that bounces up and down. We want to go off and do this. And I'm thinking, Japanese customer, tough, demanding, ocean, temperature differentials, ice, salt. I'm getting really worried, right? So one of our guys said, well, I'll go do a simulation of it. And one person in 1 week did this. Kind of cool, huh? Almost looks real. So how did I feel after I saw this? Am I feeling better? I'm feeling tremendously better. There's nothing to this thing. They're all encapsulated. It's a simple mechanical device going up and down. And the first thing we did is we took this to our customer and we confirmed, in fact, this is what they wanted. So this allowed us to iterate with our customer and get more specs, more detail, more of what they wanted in a way that was vivid so we could really talk to each other. Okay, this is the last major point. So we've talked about two things so far. Work on things that are important, not just interesting. And the second is have common frameworks and tools so when you talk about value creation, you have the ability to do that efficiently and effectively. We're not telling you what to do. We're just saying, you have to answer these questions. The next part of it is, though, how do you get the answers fast enough to be effective? And there are incubators and there are lots of things that people do. And as I said, most of them are not terribly effective. So many people in this room mark up presentations all the time. So Franz, how many presentations have you marked up in your life? 100? At least. Thousands, probably. Because we all do that. We work with our colleagues. We've got a meeting coming up. You mark them up. You send them off. They come back, and they show you the new version of what they've done. How much has that presentation improved? Is it perfect at that point? No. Just ballpark. Where are we at that point, generally?
50%.
50. That's a very high estimate, actually. Most people say 10%. And so Franz is smarter than most people, so that's why he can do it. But usually it's 10 to 20%. And so maybe you have time to meet with them one more time, and it gets a lot better, but it's still not what you want when you go into the board meeting. And the problem with Franz is he doesn't scale. He can only do this for so many people, and then he's out of luck. He can't do this for everybody. Nobody in this room can do it for everybody. So you have to find a way to scale that kind of experience, but in a really effective way. So we've tried everything, and what we do is we call them value creation forums. They're recurring. They happen every 2 to 6 weeks, multidisciplinary, different perspectives, and they're facilitated, very lightly facilitated. 3 to 5 teams will come and present for 2 to 20 minutes, typically 5 minutes. If you can't give your value proposition in 5 minutes, you probably don't understand it. NABC value propositions. And this is something we do. The speaker listens quietly, no talking back. So why don't we let them talk back? Well, there are actually several reasons. The first is typically they're so incomplete, arguing about it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. And nobody wants to hear someone arguing a presentation that was not convincing. Oftentimes you only get one shot anyway. The second reason is if you're arguing, you're not listening. That doesn't help. And the third reason is that it's really not the most effective way to learn. The way that it's effective is when you sit down, you now have a template in your head, the NABC value proposition, and you watch other people answering the same questions. And you notice when they do a good job, and you notice when they don't. It's the comparison. This is basic learning science. It's the comparison that drives the learning. So I can't move. So can I do a little experiment with you? Can I? Yeah, so, no, just sit right there. It's okay, sit there. Okay, I want to sell you a rug. Okay, do you want to buy this rug? Here's a rug. Okay, no. Suppose, you like this one better? Which one do you like? Oh, okay, pick one and I'll get rid of it.
Okay, I take the right one.
Okay, so you keep this one. Now, okay, but you want another one, right? So I now show you another one, right?
Yeah.
Which, out of these two, which ones do you like?
The left one.
The left one, okay, good. I'm going to show you another one. So you get the idea. If I show you one, you don't know what to do with it. Telling you about Steve Jobs does almost nothing for you. So what? You don't really get to see what he's doing. It's not effective. You don't really, I mean, you can learn a little bit, but you can't. It's like if you played the piano listening to Horowitz describe what he does. It's not going to be very effective. It's the comparison. So in these sessions that are run very efficiently and very fast, it's the comparison with a common framework that creates the progress. And that you rarely see this happen. Almost never outside of the people we've worked with. It is what makes the difference. And it looks like magic. In the workshops we do in 2 days, typically, and these are with leading companies, with brilliant people from the best schools, working on things that they've worked on for years, the first time they try and answer their value proposition, they can't do it. They just can't. They've never thought of it that way, and they haven't done enough homework. Second time, they can't do it. The third time, they can't do it. The fourth time, they can't do it. The fifth time, a little bit, it's getting there. The sixth time, 7. And typically, by the 7th or 8th time, the pieces come together, and there's some of the best descriptions of the value proposition they've ever seen for their projects. But it's the framework and the continuous iteration that make that possible. Learning is experiential. And if your innovation process is not experiential, it does not work. It does not work. And you see this all over the place. There's dozens of innovation processes, and they almost all miss that fundamental principle. And the result is they're not terribly effective. But if you do this, it can be enormously effective. So I want to end with one more example of the kind of things we thought about. So here's a girl with multiple sclerosis. Do you think if this were your daughter, this would be a good solution to her handicap? Would you be happy with this as a parent? No. It's terrible, right? She can barely get around. So for years in Japan, they've been building robots. So they thought, let's take a robot and let's strap it onto a human being, and that will solve the problem. So the problem is that you have to strap it onto the body somehow, so they put it around the waist. Does that look like a solution for that young girl? Would you want it? It weighs 20 pounds. It only lasts 2 hours. It doesn't look like a solution to me. And our team had a problem. The key insight was this is a completely new white space, an unaddressed market that's worth $100 billion or more. It's a major thing. But how do you attach the robot to your body? That's the problem here. And the team tried multiple value propositions over months, almost like probably a year and a half, trying to find an idea. And then finally somebody said, what about a Chinese puzzle? This is the kind of thing where you stick your finger in and it grabs, and if you push it the right way, you can pull your finger back out. So it'll grab and then let go, depending on how you manipulate it. He said, what would happen if we put a Chinese puzzle on each leg? So it's on the thigh. And let's have motion detectors. So when you step forward, it tightens, and then it can push down. And then when you move the other leg, the first leg lets go, and the second leg grabs, and then it pushes down. So grab, let go, grab, let go, grab, let go. What if we could build a system like that? And that led to this, which is the first prototype. It's a little clunky. You can tell it looks like something that was built by a technologist. This is now a new company. And the designs that they're coming up with are really quite amazing. They're not as obvious as that by any means, and some of them are not obvious at all. They're kind of hidden. And they're being designed for different kinds of disability, getting up from a chair, walking, various combinations of different things. So this is the process we went through, and until we had a key idea, we weren't spending money. The first goal was a value proposition based on a powerful new idea that we could own. That was the first step. Then we built it, and now we formed the company. So I tried to argue tonight that success requires focusing on important things, not interesting things. Most people waste their time on things that even if they solve them, it would make no difference to their enterprise. You need a playbook. You need to train your staff how to think about these things. It's a gift. If you give your employees this set of skills, I can almost guarantee they'll be able to work for as long as they want to work, not somebody else. Because the number of people who can think this way is tiny. And value propositions, I've argued, is the fundamental core of all of this. It never stops. It goes from basic research to the sales department. How many salespeople can actually give a compelling value proposition for their product? It's amazingly small. It never goes away. It goes from the beginning to an end. If it weren't short and concise, you couldn't do it. It wouldn't be effective. But if you do, it's incredibly powerful. And I ended with value creation forums, a way for the team to learn fast, not only for their innovation, but to learn the fundamentals of value creation. And I think improvements for society are between 2 and 10 times. If we could embrace this new, more productive way to work. And I think these kind of developments here in Austria would make, and in the United States and all the other places, would make a profound difference in terms of the quality of the life, the social services you could provide, and jobs, which is a desperate need around the world. So thank you.
Sit down. Thank you, Ted.